What is the most important kind of building? Maybe in the ancient world, it would have been the temple. Today, it's the building where laws are enacted. It's the modern-day equivalent of the temple. I think that most people think of the Manitoba Legislative Building as the same kind of generic building that you would find in any other province. But architecturally, there's all these elements and developments of the building that cannot be explained away as just motif. I've been studying the Manitoba Legislative Building for 6 years, obsessively, because I believe it is a reconstruction of King Solomon's Temple in the heart of the prairies. An encyclopedia of sacred architecture inscribed in stone.
Winnipeg scholar and art historian Frank Alpo discovered that the building's architect, Frank Worthington Simon, was a student of alchemy, Freemasonry, and Hermeticism, the wisdom traditions of the West. From these disciplines, Simon determined that certain symbols and geometric proportions could impact human beings in profound ways.
Frank Simon's ultimate intention with the Manitoba Legislative Building is, to borrow his own words, that the building would in the course of time make people more intelligent, better balanced, and altogether more civilized human beings.
When Frank leads tours of the building, he has people imagine they are entering a temple, which he believes was the architect's intention.
What we're doing next here is we're going to follow the procession that an ancient priest would have followed going into a temple. And there's various, as I mentioned before, there's a language of temple architecture, and the language is hidden in plain view. My relationship with Manitoba Legislative Building began as a sheer accident. I was driving by a very familiar and popular street in Winnipeg, Memorial Boulevard, and out of the corner of my eye, I noticed that the building was flanked by these two giant Egyptian sphinxes. I had no idea I was going to descend so far down a rabbit hole of discovery and obsession. Once I went into the building and I was greeted by these two giant bronze bison, I thought, wow, that's interesting, because that's precisely what you'd expect to find in a classical, pagan, or ancient Near Eastern temple. I noticed a number of other features which scholars tend to refer to as apotropaic, that which wards off evil. Things like Medusa, lion's head, and even that beautiful bust of Athena. These are all part of temple vocabulary. And a lot of people have lost this understanding. This threshold right here represents a kind of metaphysical threshold. It separates the profane world to this new world that we're about to enter. This new world is a sacred world. And you need, in order to enter into this symbolic world, these icons of protection to ward off evil. And so every person...
Through years of academic study, Frank discovered that temples in the ancient Near East often had three specific chambers: an area of protection, an altar or sanctuary, and a holy of holies that was off limits to everyone but the high priest.
I'm just thinking in the back of my mind, well, gosh, I have all of these other features that are part of temple vocabulary. If I were to find an altar next, then maybe I have a thesis. When you enter into the rotunda, you're now in the era of Renaissance church architecture. In that same room that we're expecting an altar, I found, 12 small lights on one of the lamps around a much larger bright light. And to me, this was a kind of reference, an allegory to the 12 disciples around the bright light of Christ.
In the altar area is a painting known as the War Memorial. But Frank noticed clues suggesting that the mural depicted the Passion of Christ.
Directly above the figure of Jesus, right there, hidden in plain view, is the Madonna and Child. It's a representation of the Passion of Christ, exactly where you'd expect to find the presence of the Lord if this was a Christian house of worship. You might have looked down and noticed this 8-pointed star. As we circle around the star, it appears that the star is always closest to us, right? It's a kind of optical illusion.
Frank claims that the 8-pointed star is an ancient symbol of fertility, which represents the province of Manitoba. Directly above this symbol on the dome of the building is the famous Golden Boy statue, who watches over the city. Frank reasons that this is the Greek god Hermes, the deity of travel, father of alchemy, and a symbol of the city of Winnipeg.
Hermes, a patron of merchantry, travel, and who sat at the crossroads. Well, isn't that exactly what Winnipeg represented. It was the center of travel, merchantry, and the kind of crossroads of the nation. And for us, in order to kind of complete this journey, there is one last room that we're allowed to go, well, in fact, we're not allowed to go into. And it's that room right there. It's the one room that's forbidden for any public access. Nobody is allowed in this room. All temples have a Holy of Holies. And this one, the legislative temple, also has a Holy of Holies.
The Holy of Holies is the most sacred chamber of Solomon's temple. It was where the Ark of the Covenant, which represented God's presence on earth, was stored. Solomon's temple is the central symbol for the fraternal organization known as Freemasonry. Freemasons were intimately involved in the construction of the legislature, and every premier in Manitoba was a Mason from 1872 to 1968.
These elements from architecture can have an effect on the soul, can have effect on becoming a more moral person. And isn't that the cornerstone of Freemasonry?
Frank found that the proportions of the room matched those of the Holy of Holies described in the Bible, 20 cubits by 20 cubits.
A lot of people entered into this debate as what was the unit of measurement used to build King Solomon's temple. And even the Freemasons entered into this debate. And they determined that a cubit was 14.4 inches. And if you take that unit of measurement and you apply it to this room, it turns out to be exactly 20 cubits by 20 cubits. That's pretty good, huh?
What was missing from the room was the Ark of the Covenant, the container for the 10 Commandments. After months of following clues, Frank discovered it on the roof. It was disguised as the war chest.
It was exhilarating. I mean, I felt like Indiana Jones. Yeah, I don't know how else to put this. I mean, the whole saga of Indiana Jones is this kind of crusade for the most important biblical artifact known to man that had been lost and buried and no one knows where it is. And there it was in my own hometown, looking up at the eastern kind of pediment of the building, the Ark of the Covenant. This kind of sacred geometry lent itself to the glory of God. So you would walk into a building and somehow in the depths of your soul you would feel, ooh, there's something, I feel the presence of the Lord here.
Beautiful story.